The year was 1755, and the air resonated with the clamor of war. A cacophony of gunfire and the clash of steel filled the forests of North America, where British and French forces converged in a struggle for dominance. In a clearing near Fort Duquesne, General Edward Braddock led his troops, a force of nearly 1,500 men, through the dense underbrush. The morning was still, yet tension crackled like the leaves beneath their heavy boots. Braddock, an experienced officer, had fought valiantly in Europe, but here, in the wilds of the colonies, he faced an enemy unlike any he had encountered before. As his men marched in formation, their red coats a striking sight against the backdrop of verdant trees, they were blissfully unaware of the impending ambush. The French and their Native American allies awaited them, hidden and silent, just beyond the tree line. At precisely noon, when the sun was high and the chatter of the soldiers filled the air, a sudden volley of gunfire erupted from all sides. The French and their allies, employing guerrilla tactics, unleashed a deadly barrage. The British soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, faltered. As their ranks broke, Braddock shouted commands, desperation in his voice. "Form up! Form up!" But the soldiers, caught in a maelstrom of chaos, could not heed his orders. The ground beneath them became a tableau of horror. The cries of the wounded mingled with the air of gunpowder and sweat. It was a scene of disarray, with men falling one after another, the death toll mounting swiftly. By the end of the encounter, nearly 900 of Braddock's men lay dead or wounded, a staggering loss for the British crown. As Braddock himself fell, mortally wounded, he was carried from the field, his once proud command shattered. The battle, known as the Battle of the Monongahela, would mark a turning point in the French and Indian War, igniting a fierce determination in the colonies. The shock of defeat resonated deeply among the British, leaving them to ponder their strategy in this vast, untamed land. But to understand how we got here, in the early 1750s, tensions simmered in North America as competing empires sought control over vast and uncharted territories. The British Crown, eager to expand its influence, eyed the rich lands of the Ohio Valley, a region that promised fertile soil and abundant resources. Yet this land was also coveted by the French, who had established a series of forts to secure their claims. Among these strongholds was Fort Duquesne, strategically located at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, a crucial point for trade and military operations. By 1754, the conflict became more than just a contest for territory. It was an inevitable clash of cultures, ambitions, and alliances. The British settlers, many of whom had recently arrived from Europe, were driven by a spirit of enterprise and a belief in manifest destiny. They sought not only land, but also a sense of belonging in a new world. Meanwhile, the French, represented by their indigenous allies, were determined to protect their interests and assert their dominance in the region. The French and Indian War was brewing, a conflict that would draw in not only the colonial powers, but also the Native American tribes who found themselves caught in the crossfire. At the heart of this unfolding drama were several key figures. General Edward Braddock, a seasoned British officer, was tasked with leading an expedition to capture Fort Duquesne. Braddock was a man of conviction and resolve, yet he harbored a certain disdain for colonial militias, believing that traditional European military tactics would ensure victory. His confidence was bolstered by his experience in previous campaigns in Europe, but this war would demand more than conventional strategies. His belief in the might of the British Army would soon be put to the test. In contrast, the French commander of Fort Duquesne, Marquis Claude de Montcalm, was a pragmatic leader, well versed in the complexities of warfare in North America. Montcalm understood the importance of alliances and maneuvering in the dense forests that characterized the landscape. He recognized that his strength lay not only in his troops, but also in the support of various Native American tribes, including the Iroquois and the Huron. The French had forged alliances built on mutual respect and trade, which would prove to be a formidable advantage. As the British and French prepared for conflict, the indigenous tribes navigated a delicate balance. Some chose to ally with the French, drawn by promises of protection and support against encroaching settlers. Others, like the Iroquois Confederacy, sought to maintain their autonomy playing both sides against each other to secure favorable terms. The reality on the ground was complex, with families torn between loyalties and the desire for peace in a land threatened by war. Amidst this backdrop of competing ambitions, a young officer named George Washington emerged as a central figure. At just 22 years old, Washington had already gained valuable experience in the Virginia militia. His desire for military glory was matched by an understanding of the land and its people. When tasked with delivering a message to the French at Fort Duquesne, he recognized the stakes involved. Washington's journey through the wilderness, fraught with danger, would mark the beginning of his legendary military career. On the evening of May 28, 1754, Washington and his men engaged in a skirmish with French forces near present-day Jumonville Glen, a pivotal moment that would ignite the flames of war. The clash resulted in the death of a French commander, Joseph Coulon de Villers de Jumonville, an act that would reverberate through the annals of history. Washington's actions, though a mere prelude to the larger conflict, set in motion a series of events that would change the course of North American history. As the summer of 1755 approached, news of Braddock's expedition spread through the colonies, igniting a mix of enthusiasm and apprehension. Colonial leaders were hopeful that a decisive victory would solidify British power in North America. However, the realities of warfare in the densely wooded terrain were often underestimated. The British troops, accustomed to open battlefields, lacked the guerrilla tactics necessary to navigate the challenging landscapes of the New World. The atmosphere was charged with anticipation as Braddock's army marched toward Fort Duquesne. Almost 1,500 British troops, including regulars and colonial militia, moved with a sense of purpose, but also with the overconfidence that comes from years of unchallenged dominance. They believed in their superiority, yet they were ill-prepared for the ambush that awaited them in the forests. On July 9, 1755, the British troops crossed the Monongahela River, and the atmosphere shifted from one of buoyant optimism to one of dread. As they advanced, the sound of rustling leaves and distant war cries echoed through the trees. Braddock's forces soon found themselves ensnared in a trap set by the French and their native allies. The ambush at the Battle of the Monongahela would become a defining moment, resulting in nearly 900 casualties, including the death of Braddock himself. The British defeat marked the beginning of a long and arduous conflict, one that would reshape the colonial landscape. As the echoes of battle faded, the tensions that had simmered for years erupted into full-scale war. The people of North America, both settlers and indigenous tribes, found themselves irrevocably altered by the consequences of conflict. The French and Indian War would become a crucible, forging new alliances and animosities that would resonate through history, shaping the path toward independence for the colonies and ultimately leading to the birth of a new nation. In the spring of 1758, the atmosphere in the British colonies was charged with a blend of anticipation and dread. The French and Indian War had unfolded over the past 3 years, revealing the complexities of colonial alliances and the fierce determination of indigenous tribes. With the defeat at the Battle of the Monongahela still fresh in the minds of the colonists, a shift was brewing. General John Forbes, appointed to lead the British forces in a renewed campaign against Fort Duquesne, held ambitious plans for the year ahead. Forbes, aware of the strategic significance of Fort Duquesne, recognized that its capture could turn the tide of the war. The fort, located at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, had become a key stronghold for the French, who had established a network of alliances with various Native American tribes. The British were not merely fighting a military enemy, they were contending with a complex web of local loyalties and cultural identities. Forbes understood this all too well, stating in a letter to the British government that the Indians are as necessary to us as our own troops. On June 28, 1758, Forbes launched his campaign, leading a force of nearly 6,000 men, including regulars and colonial militia. As they marched through the dense forests of Pennsylvania, the troops faced not only the threat of ambush, but also the challenges of supply and communication. The British had learned from their earlier missteps. Logistics were now a priority. They constructed supply roads, utilizing local labor to facilitate the movement of their forces. This proactive approach was a significant departure from the chaotic conditions of previous campaigns. Meanwhile, a young officer named George Washington, now a seasoned veteran at the age of 26, was present in a supporting role. He had gained invaluable experience during the initial skirmishes of the war, and his presence lent credibility to Forbes's campaign. Washington, reflecting on the changing nature of warfare, noted, "The art of war is to be able to adapt." His insight would prove essential in navigating the unpredictable landscape of both the battlefield and colonial politics. As the British forces advanced, they encountered resistance from French and Allied Native American fighters. The French, under the command of Marquis Claude de Montcalm, were determined to defend their territory. Montcalm had a reputation for strategic cunning, and he understood the importance of maintaining the support of indigenous allies. The French were not merely defending a fort, they were protecting the livelihoods and lands of their Native American partners. In the early days of July, the British forces reached the outskirts of Fort Duquesne, but they were met with fierce resistance. The battle that ensued on July 9th was marked by confusion and brutal combat. Forbes had hoped to lay siege to the fort, but the French and their allies launched a counteroffensive that caught the British off guard. The clamor of musket fire and the cries of the wounded filled the air, a grim reminder of the stakes involved. The aftermath of the battle was a sobering reality. The British forces suffered significant casualties, but they did not waver. Forbes's strategy was evolving. Instead of direct assaults, he opted for a siege, encircling the fort in hopes of starving the enemy into submission. This approach reflected a growing understanding of the necessity for patience and strategy over brute force. On August 1st, 1758, the fort's defenders, beleaguered and running low on supplies, began to feel the pressure. The British had successfully cut off their access to resources, and the morale of the French troops was faltering. Montcalm, aware of the precarious situation, sent messages to his superiors in Canada, urging them for reinforcements. However, the British resolve was as unyielding as the summer heat bearing down on the region. Forbes's men dug in, determined to see the campaign through to its conclusion. By August 14th, the British completed their encampment near the fort, and the siege was firmly established. The sight of British flags flying on the horizon brought a sense of hope to the colonies. Local settlers began to view the campaign as a turning point. Reports filtered back to the towns and villages, igniting a fervor of patriotism among colonists who had previously been disillusioned by military setbacks. The growing belief was that the British could indeed secure victory, and with it, the promise of land and opportunity. On September 8, 1758, the French, unable to sustain their defenses any longer, made the decision to abandon Fort Duquesne. They set fire to the fort and retreated, a move that would alter the dynamics of the war. The British forces marched into the ruins of the fort, raising their flag in a symbolic gesture of triumph. Forbes, witnessing the moment, declared, "We have turned the tide." This victory would not only bolster British morale, but also mark a significant shift in the power struggle between the colonial powers in North America. Yet, the victory came at a cost. The conflict had left deep scars, and the landscape of alliances was forever altered. The Native American tribes, who had allied with the French, now found themselves at a crossroads, facing an uncertain future. The British victory at Fort Duquesne did not signify the end of conflict, but rather set the stage for further struggles over territory and cultural identity. As the war continued, the complexities of colonial life intertwined with the harsh realities of military engagements. In the heart of this tumultuous period, the aspirations of colonists clashed with the realities of war. The emergence of a collective identity began to take shape, fueled by shared experiences and a growing sense of belonging. The French and Indian War, often seen through the lens of military campaigns, was also a crucible for the evolving American identity, one forged in the fires of conflict and the dreams of a new world. As the smoke cleared from the remnants of Fort Duquesne, the echoes of ambition, conflict, and cultural upheaval lingered in the air, a testament to the complexities of a world on the brink of transformation. The year was 1759, and the conflict known as the French and Indian War had reached a pivotal moment. The British forces, emboldened by previous victories, turned their attention to the heart of French power in North America, Quebec. The stakes were monumental. This was not merely a contest for territory. It was a struggle for dominance on the continent, a clash of empires that would shape the future of North America. In June of that year, General James Wolfe, a daring and ambitious officer, prepared his troops for the assault on the city. Wolfe, then in his mid-30s, was known for his unconventional strategies and relentless drive. He had roughly 9,000 men under his command, facing off against the fortified city of Quebec, which was defended by the French General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm and his force of about 4,500 soldiers. As Wolfe's forces approached, the air was thick with anticipation. The British had suffered considerable casualties in previous skirmishes, and the specter of defeat loomed large. On the morning of September 13, 1759, Wolfe executed a daring plan. Under the cover of night, his troops scaled the steep cliffs of the Plains of Abraham, a maneuver that would catch Montcalm by surprise. The British forces emerged at dawn, weapons drawn, ready for battle. The clash began with cannon fire echoing across the plains. The sound of musket shots filled the air as soldiers on both sides rushed into combat. The cries of the wounded mingled with the roar of cannon, creating a cacophony that would be remembered by those who survived. The battle was fierce and brutal. Wolfe, standing tall, shouted commands to his men, rallying them against the French defenders. As they clashed, Wolfe was struck by a bullet in the wrist, yet he pressed on, urging his soldiers to hold their ground. Meanwhile, Montcalm, witnessing the ferocity of the British assault, directed his troops with equal fervor. In the chaotic melee, he too was wounded, a bullet piercing his abdomen. The struggle was not merely military, it was deeply personal. Soldiers fought not just for their countries, but for their homes, their families, and their futures. The human cost was staggering. By the end of the day, the British would claim victory on the Plains of Abraham, but at what price? The battle resulted in approximately 600 British casualties, with Wolfe among the fallen. His last words, recorded by eyewitnesses, were a somber reflection of the conflict. Support me, I am killed." Montcalm, gravely wounded, would succumb to his injuries the next day, leaving the French forces in disarray. With Quebec in British hands, the tide of the war shifted dramatically. The victory paved the way for British dominance in Canada and marked a turning point in the conflict. But the repercussions of this battle extended far beyond the battlefield. The war had exacted a heavy toll on both sides, claiming tens of thousands of lives in the years leading up to this moment. As the winter of 1759 approached, the stark reality of the conflict weighed heavily on the surviving soldiers and their families. The war had begun with a struggle for territory and resources, but it evolved into a crisis of identity and allegiance. Colonists, many of whom had initially supported British efforts, began to question their loyalty. They had witnessed the brutal realities of war firsthand, their neighbors lost to battles fought far from home. The death toll continued to climb. It is estimated that between 1754 and 1763, around 20,000 soldiers on both sides were killed, with countless more wounded or displaced. As towns were ravaged and communities shattered, the desire for independence began to simmer beneath the surface. In the aftermath of Quebec, British authorities sought to consolidate their hold over the newly acquired territories. The Proclamation of 1763, issued by King George III, sought to stabilize relations with indigenous peoples by restricting colonial expansion westward. This decision did not sit well with many colonists, who had fought for the right to claim these lands. The growing resentment would fuel the flames of dissent in the coming years. As the British military celebrated its victory in Quebec, the reality of governance became increasingly complex. The costs of the war weighed heavily on Britain, leading to the imposition of new taxes on the colonies to recoup financial losses. The Stamp Act of 1765, which required colonial subjects to pay a tax on printed materials, set off a wave of protests and unrest. "No taxation without representation" became the rallying cry for many colonists who felt increasingly alienated from their mother country. The sentiment among the colonists was shifting rapidly. Leaders like Samuel Adams and Patrick Henry began to emerge, articulating the frustrations of everyday people caught in the crosshairs of imperial ambitions. Their words resonated deeply, igniting a revolutionary spirit that would soon engulf the colonies. By the end of the year, as the cold winds of winter swept through the streets of Boston and beyond, the seeds of revolution were firmly planted. The French and Indian War, initially a contest for territory, had morphed into a profound crisis of loyalty, governance, and identity. The sacrifices made on the battlefields of Quebec and beyond would echo through history, shaping the very foundation of a new nation. In the quiet of the aftermath, as the last echoes of gunfire faded into memory, the realization dawned: the world had irrevocably changed. The landscape of North America was marked not just by borders and treaties, but by the indelible scars left on the hearts and minds of those who lived through it. In the end, the war was not just about land, it was about people and their unyielding desire for freedom and autonomy. On September 13, 1759, the air was thick with tension as British troops prepared for battle on the Plains of Abraham, just outside Quebec. General James Wolfe, commanding nearly 9,000 men, had meticulously planned this assault. He understood the stakes. The fate of Canada hung in the balance. The French forces, led by General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, numbered around 4,500, a force bolstered by their familiarity with the land. Wolfe, however, carried the weight of ambition and desperation. He knew victory was essential to secure British dominance in North America. The battle commenced in the early morning hours, with Wolfe's troops advancing under the cover of a thick fog. As they neared the French lines, Wolfe issued his orders with a calm authority. He declared, "I had rather be a dead man than a coward," a sentiment echoed in the hearts of his men, who surged forward to meet their adversaries. Early reports from the battlefield would later reveal a staggering truth. Both sides would suffer great losses, but the cost of this engagement would prove particularly heavy for the French. Montcalm, in his own right, was a formidable commander. He had defended Quebec with strategic brilliance, yet on this day he faced the unwelcome challenge of a surprise assault. As the British opened fire, a devastating exchange began. The crack of musket fire and the thud of cannonballs filled the air, drowning out the cries of men. Within moments, confusion swept through the ranks. The British, despite being outnumbered, executed their maneuvers with precision, turning the tide of war in ways previously thought improbable. By the end of the day, the battlefield would be soaked in blood. The British forces suffered approximately 600 casualties, while the French endured losses that would ripple through their entire command structure. Montcalm, wounded in the battle, succumbed to his injuries just hours later. His last words reportedly were, "They have won. I am a dead man," a poignant admission that encapsulated the finality of that moment, not just for him, but for the French hold on Canada. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a muted light over the aftermath, Wolfe too would not survive. He fell to a shot, struck in the chest, but not before witnessing the retreat of the French forces. His final orders echoed through the ranks. "Support me, my brave fellows." His death marked a turning point in the war, a moment that shifted the balance of power irrevocably. The British victory at Quebec was not merely a tactical success, it was the beginning of the end for French dominion in North America. In the months following the battle, the impact of Wolfe's and Montcalm's deaths resonated deeply across the colonies. General Edward Braddock's earlier miscalculations and the chaos of the Monongahela seemed to fade into the background, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose among British commanders. The momentum shifted, and with it came a flood of enlistments as colonists rallied to the cause, driven by the fervor of newfound hope. George Washington, who had been a witness to the unfolding chaos of the war, found himself at a crossroads. Having served as an aide to Braddock and later as a leader in the Virginia militia, he understood the complexities of the conflict. As news of the British victory at Quebec spread, he saw an opportunity to rise further in military ranks. Despite the losses, the sense of a collective identity among the colonies began to solidify. Washington noted in a letter to a friend, "The spirit of America is rising, and the cause of liberty is taking root." However, the war was far from over. The Treaty of Paris, signed in 1763, would formally conclude hostilities, ceding large swaths of French territory in North America to the British. Yet the seeds of discontent were already being sown, as the burdens of war began to weigh heavily on the colonial populace. The financial demands placed upon the colonies would soon ignite a different kind of conflict, one rooted in the very principles of governance and taxation. As autumn settled over the landscape, towns and villages across the colonies prepared for the long winter ahead. The men who had fought at Quebec returned home as heroes, yet the toll of war lingered in their eyes. Families mourned the fallen, while others celebrated the victories, creating a tapestry of experiences woven from both grief and glory. The battle had transformed the lives of many. General Forbes, who had been planning a campaign against Fort Duquesne, shifted his focus in light of the British successes. His strategic mind sought to fortify British positions, understanding that the war was evolving. He remarked to his officers, "We must build upon our victories, for the future of the colonies depends upon it." In contrast, the French settlers faced an uncertain future. Many were displaced, their homes and lands now under British control. The once thriving fur trade began to dwindle, and the cultural fabric of New France began to unravel. In this charged atmosphere, the ideas that had survived the chaos of the battlefield began to take root. The notion of liberty and self-determination began to flourish, eventually leading to calls for independence that would echo through the years to come. As the leaves turned and settled upon the ground, those who had witnessed the turning point at Quebec understood, perhaps instinctively, that they were living through a decisive moment in history. The echoes of cannon fire had faded, but the spirit of determination remained alive, waiting for a new chapter to unfold. The sun set over Quebec in the aftermath of the momentous clash on September 13, 1759. The air, thick with the scent of gunpowder and the acrid tang of smoke, hung heavily over the plains of Abraham. The once vibrant ground, now stained with the blood of thousands, bore witness to the brutal toll of war. General James Wolfe, a commander revered for his audacity, lay lifeless, having succumbed to a mortal wound. His counterpart, General Louis-Joseph de Montcalm, shared a similar fate, both men dying as symbols of their nation's fervent ambitions. The loss of these leaders plunged their respective armies into a profound state of grief, yet it also ignited a fierce determination among the surviving soldiers. In the days that followed, the British forces found themselves in a precarious position. The victory came at a steep price. The casualty count was staggering. Of the 9,000 British troops who had marched into battle, approximately 600 now lay dead, with many more injured, their fates uncertain. The French, facing an even harsher reality, sustained casualties near 1,400, a significant blow to their already beleaguered forces. As the British forces established their control over Quebec, they faced the daunting task of fortifying their position against potential French counterattacks and securing the loyalty of the local populace. Reports began to filter in from the surrounding regions, echoing the devastation left in the wake of the battle. Villages that had once thrived now lay in ruins, their inhabitants either fled or caught in the crossfire. A local merchant, Pierre Duval, lamented to his neighbors, "Our lives have been shattered, our livelihoods lost, and all that remains is the hope that we can rebuild." The resilience of the people would be tested as they faced the specter of famine and destruction, the echoes of cannon fire still ringing in their ears. As autumn approached, the British sought to consolidate their gains, sending reinforcements and supplies to Quebec. However, the challenges were manifold. Food shortages loomed, exacerbated by the ongoing conflict. In a desperate bid to maintain order, British officers imposed strict rations, often leaving soldiers and civilians alike to scavenge for sustenance. The price of flour skyrocketed to more than 3 times its pre-war value, leaving many to barter goods for basic necessities. The streets, once bustling with traders and residents, now reflected an air of uncertainty and desperation. Among the ranks of the British troops was a young soldier, Private Thomas Reed, who had witnessed the horrors of battle and now faced the stark reality of survival. He wrote in a letter home, "We are alive, but at what cost? The laughter of yesterday is silenced by the cries of the wounded. His words captured the somber mood that permeated the camps, where camaraderie struggled against the backdrop of loss. The French, meanwhile, were not ready to concede defeat. In the absence of Montcalm's leadership, the remnants of their forces regrouped, rallying under the banner of new commanders like François de Lévis. Lévis, determined to reclaim Quebec, sought to forge alliances with indigenous groups who had long resisted both French and British encroachments. He understood the importance of unity, declaring, "We must stand together against the tide of conquest. Our strength lies in our numbers." The call to arms resonated through the forests, igniting a flicker of hope among those who had suffered under foreign dominion. The landscape of North America began to shift in the wake of the battle. The British, emboldened by their victory, expanded their territorial claims, pushing deeper into French-controlled lands. The Ohio Valley, still simmering with tension, became a focal point of conflict. The Treaty of Paris was looming on the horizon, yet the road to peace remained fraught with obstacles. The fate of the continent hung in the balance, as indigenous nations, caught between the rival powers, sought to navigate these treacherous waters. As winter crept in, the realities of war settled into the hearts of those who remained. The toll of the conflict was not merely in the loss of life, but also in the dislocation of communities. Families were torn apart, and the longing for home weighed heavily on the soldiers. Private Reed penned another letter, reflecting on the desolation surrounding him. "The snow falls softly on the graves of our brothers. Their dreams died with them, and we march on, carrying their memories in our hearts." The quiet of winter brought a somber stillness, yet the promise of spring hinted at renewal amidst the devastation. In the months that followed the battle, the British began to rebuild, not just their fortifications but also their relationships with the local populace. Efforts were made to restore trade and re-establish stability. The construction of new buildings in Quebec, though slow, signified a commitment to enduring presence. British officials sought to integrate the French-speaking population into their new regime, recognizing the need for cooperation over oppression. The war's legacy loomed large, its impact felt across the continent. The French and Indian War, a catalyst for change, set the stage for future conflicts, sowing seeds of discontent among the colonists. The memories of battle and loss would not fade easily. They would shape the narratives of those who lived through it, influencing their paths in the turbulent years to come. As the seasons changed, so too did the landscape of North America. The echoes of conflict remained, and while the British emerged victorious at Quebec, the cost was profound. The sacrifices of men like Wolfe and Montcalm would linger in the collective consciousness, their stories woven into the fabric of a new world being forged from the ashes of war. The human reckoning had begun, and in its wake, the contours of history were irrevocably altered. In the years following the conclusion of the French and Indian War in 1763, a seismic shift reverberated through the Americas and beyond. The war, which had concluded with the Treaty of Paris, fundamentally altered the landscape of colonial power and initiated a series of events that would culminate in the American Revolution. The British Empire emerged as the preeminent power in North America, having gained vast territories, including Canada and Florida, a feat that transformed the geopolitical dynamics of the continent. Yet, this victory came at an extraordinary cost. The war had inflicted heavy casualties. Over 70,000 soldiers perished, and the financial burdens of conflict led the British government to impose new taxes on the colonies, including the Stamp Act of 1765, igniting widespread resentment. Colonists, who had fought alongside British troops, began to feel the weight of their sacrifices. They had witnessed the grim realities of war, from the deaths of leaders like General James Wolfe at the Battle of Quebec to the struggles at Fort Duquesne. The memories of these sacrifices were etched into the collective consciousness of the colonies. An anonymous soldier wrote in a letter home, "We have bled for this land, and yet we are treated as mere subjects." Such sentiments crystallized the growing desire for autonomy, fostering a spirit of rebellion that would soon erupt. As the years passed, the narrative of the French and Indian War evolved. Historians and politicians alike began to mythologize the conflict, framing it as a noble struggle for survival against European imperialism. This interpretation often overshadowed the complexities of the alliances formed between Native American tribes and European powers. The Iroquois Confederacy, once a powerful coalition, found itself increasingly marginalized in the aftermath of the war. Their involvement was often portrayed as mere sideshow to British and French ambitions, despite their significant contributions and losses during the conflict. By the 19th century, the tale of the French and Indian War had taken on a life of its own, romanticized in novels and painted in grand canvases. Figures like George Washington emerged as iconic heroes, shaping the narrative of American exceptionalism. Washington's early military experiences during the war were recast as the foundation of his leadership in the Revolutionary War. The reality, however, was far more nuanced. The war highlighted Washington's inexperience, as evidenced by the disastrous defeat at Fort Necessity in 1754, where he commanded a poorly equipped militia against French and Native American forces. Yet, these early failures were often glossed over in favor of a heroic retelling. The conflict also had lasting implications for relations with indigenous peoples. Following the war, British policies toward Native Americans shifted dramatically. As British settlers moved westward, encroaching on tribal lands, tensions escalated. The Proclamation of 1763, which sought to limit colonial expansion beyond the Appalachian Mountains, was largely ignored by settlers eager for land. This disregard for indigenous sovereignty fostered further conflict, culminating in a series of violent confrontations, such as Pontiac's Rebellion in 1763, where native tribes united against British encroachment. The war had not only reshaped the colonial landscape, but had also sown the seeds for a protracted struggle over land and identity that would continue for centuries. In the decades that followed, the legacy of the French and Indian War became intertwined with the burgeoning American identity. The war was often invoked in the rhetoric of revolutionaries, who pointed to it as a precursor to their own fight for freedom. Benjamin Franklin, who had witnessed the conflict firsthand, famously stated, "We must all hang together, or assuredly we shall all hang separately." This call for unity resonated deeply in the wake of the war and provided a rallying cry for those seeking independence from British rule. As the American Revolution unfolded, the war's implications became even clearer. The British military strategies tested during the French and Indian War were applied in the Revolutionary War, leading to both successes and failures. The tactics of guerrilla warfare, learned from indigenous allies, became a cornerstone of American military strategy. The lessons of the past were not lost, as revolutionary generals sought to adapt and innovate in their quest for victory. The war's legacy extended far beyond North American borders. In France, the financial strain of the conflict contributed to the conditions that sparked the French Revolution in 1789. The loss of colonial territories and the rise of new political ideologies reshaped European power dynamics. The Treaty of Paris not only altered the map of North America, but also set a precedent for the decolonization movements that would sweep across the globe in the 19th and 20th centuries. Yet, amid these sweeping changes, the war also left scars. The heavy death toll, estimated at nearly 90,000, was a stark reminder of the cost of conflict. Towns lay in ruin, families mourned lost loved ones, and the fabric of society was irrevocably altered. The promise of peace and prosperity that followed the war was marred by economic hardship, as colonial subjects grappled with the burden of taxation and the struggle for representation. The echoes of discontent would resonate for generations. In closing, the French and Indian War was not merely a prelude to the American Revolution. It was a crucible that forged a new identity, an enduring conflict with indigenous peoples, and a catalyst for global change. The narratives that emerged from this period were complex and often contradictory, reflecting the myriad experiences of those who lived through it. The war had transformed territories, altered alliances, and reshaped the destinies of nations. As we reflect on its legacy, we are reminded of the profound ways in which history weaves together the lives of individuals, the fates of nations, and the ever-evolving tapestry of human existence. As you drift into slumber, consider the words of the colonist John Dickinson, who remarked, "It is not the title of the land that makes it ours, but the blood and toil of those who have fought for it." This sentiment captures the essence of sacrifice, reminding us of the enduring struggles that have defined the very fabric of our world. The French and Indian War, a conflict that drew together varied peoples and ambitions, remains a testament to the complexities of human nature. As British, French, and Native American forces clashed, each side fought not merely for territory, but for their very way of life. General James Wolfe, in his final moments at the Plains of Abraham, reflected the relentless drive for victory, a sentiment echoed by many leaders who sought to carve their names into history. His words, "I would rather die than surrender," illustrate a fervent ambition that resonates across ages, revealing how deeply intertwined our desires for power and legacy can be. Yet, amidst the grandeur of military campaigns, there lies the stark reality of loss. Over 70,000 soldiers perished throughout the war, families were torn apart, and communities shattered. The grief experienced by countless mothers, fathers, and children is palpable in the letters exchanged between soldiers and their loved ones. One soldier wrote home, "The war takes my brothers one by one. I fear I shall be next." This simple statement encapsulates the personal stakes of a sprawling conflict, reminding us that behind every battle were lives lived, dreams deferred, and the enduring hope of survival. In this struggle, we also find a profound exploration of loyalty and betrayal. Native American tribes, once allies of the French, were caught in the shifting tides of allegiance, often forced to choose sides in a battle that was not theirs. The Iroquois Confederacy, once a powerful coalition, faced disunity as they weighed their survival against the encroaching British forces. Each decision was fraught with consequence, highlighting how ambition can lead to both collaboration and conflict, love and loss. The echoes of their choices linger, reminding us that the quest for power often comes at a deep personal cost. As we consider the legacy of the French and Indian War, it invites us to reflect on our own pursuits. What drives us to seek ambition? What sacrifices do we make for love, power, or survival? Each figure in this narrative, from Wolfe to the common soldier, faced these questions in their own way, revealing the timeless struggles that bind humanity across generations. As you drift towards sleep, let these stories of ambition, sacrifice, and the quest for belonging anchor you. In the quiet of the night, think of those who lived these experiences, their hopes and fears entwined with the very fabric of history, reminding us that we are all part of a larger tapestry of human experience. Thank you for spending this time with us. If you enjoyed tonight's journey into the past, consider subscribing to Sleeping History Dreams for more long-form historical storytelling each week. Good night, and we'll see you in the next one.